Constitutional reform just at least is a broad term for making changes to the Constitution. And I thought it's necessary for us to sort of educate people on why it's necessary.
Why is it necessary?
We are the only country that has done this weird and crazy thing of putting all these anti-foreign investment restrictions in the Constitution.
I'll push back a little. I'll play the devil's advocate. Aren't they going to price the Filipino out? Aren't some countries like Australia complaining about Chinese coming in and buying all their land, and now the locals can't buy their own land? What do you do to prevent that? What exactly is the correct movement, and how is this going to change it?
Okay, so the correct movement, correct actually stands for constitutional reform and rectification for economic competitiveness and
I
transformation.
thought that was clever, by the way.
Thanks, man.
But yeah, it was like when you explained it like that, I thought, "Oh, that's a perfect little acronym." Go ahead.
Because I mean, I wanted to make sure that people, when they look at what it is we stand for, which is constitutional reform, there's a reason for it. We're not just we'll change it for the sake of changing it. No, we're changing it for the sake of making the country more economically competitive, and in order to transform the country for the better. Because the problem is, for the longest time, charter change, which is actually an only in the Philippines kind of terminology, charter change, which is better, cha-cha, right? They've demonized it. A lot of the times it has been demonized. But the correct term, really, the international term, you watch all these international news channels and all that, you'll never hear them say charter change. You'll hear them say constitutional reform.
Or amendments. Is that fall into the same thing?
Constitutional reform just at least is a broad term for making changes to the Constitution. And I thought it's necessary for us to sort of educate people on why it's necessary.
Yes. Why is it necessary?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right? Because I mean, it's for the longest time, a lot of Filipinos have been brainwashed to think that changing the Constitution is so that you will have term extensions,
Okay, let's use a real world example that they can relate to. For example, foreign ownership is a huge part of what you talk about.
Yes.
FDI, foreign direct investment. I'll push back a little. I'll play the devil's advocate.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to challenge you because I know a fraction of what you know, probably 1% of what you know. I just want to play the devil's advocate so that I can learn. I really want to learn what you're trying to do here. 40% is the current FDI, right? So they can only own a maximum of 40% of a business here. Some might make the argument, especially if you're talking about buying land and stuff like that, aren't they going to price the Filipino out? Aren't some countries like Australia complaining about the Chinese coming in and buying all their land, and now the locals can't buy their own land? What do you do to prevent that?
What we in the correct movement are actually talking about when we say, number one, economic liberalization, which is to remove all the anti-foreign investment restrictions that are found in the Constitution. What you want to do is to say, we'll take them out of the Constitution, but we can still have restrictions and regulations in legislation and in policy. They don't need to be in the Constitution. In fact, I think that's the biggest problem of the Philippines. We are the only country that has done this weird and crazy thing of putting all these anti-foreign investment restrictions in the Constitution. Nobody else does that. And the reason for that, the reason why I say it's crazy is the Constitution is something you can't change. You cannot tweak so easily. But if you put into law instead these little restrictions, you can fine tune it when you need to. So for example, if we say, all right, we're no longer going to make a ban on foreigners owning land, for example, we can then have laws that say, wait a minute, we're not going to allow just any foreigner to own land. We're going to say, well, first of all, are you a foreigner who owns a business that creates jobs for Filipinos? We could have a law like that. And then we say, now, if you create enough jobs, for example, well, hey, you're in the welcomed group.
Okay.
We can always have something like that.
I get it. So not to interrupt you, I'm absorbing, and I'm trying to put into things that I understand. Like, for example, the marijuana law, which is controversial. It's not that you want to put that in the Constitution that marijuana is okay and good for you. No, it's just you decriminalize it. You take it out of that that frame or lens that it's
Mhm.
criminal and all this, and then you have regulations around,
Regulations.
like,
Yes.
okay, is it for medicinal purposes, is it for this purpose?
Indeed.
That's how you manage it, rather than what we have. You're saying is in the Constitution it says bawal ang mga puti, ganon.
Yeah. We have
Basically,
something like that.
our
Yeah.
version of it says bawal, basta
Yeah.
bawal, because we're threatened by them, that they will take over our economic stability. Is that the,
I think so there was this
where do you think the good intention was, if you were to give them credit for
so long ago there was this thing called the Filipino First movement that was coming out. It was, economic protectionism. It came from, I would say they had all these so-called good intentions, right? They wanted to say, well, we want to make sure that ordinary Filipinos are protected, so that we Filipinos own most of the means of production, et cetera, and the land.
So we'll rig the game.
We'll rig the game.
Yeah.
Right? But then there are all these unintended consequences, which is that by doing so, you've actually made it harder for companies to easily come in and create jobs. Because the end result was that by preventing foreign investors from easily coming in, you're basically saying, okay, only Filipino investors, only Filipino businessmen should be able to really dominate the scene. Problem is, wait a minute, there are not that many of them.
Yeah.
There are not that many Filipino businessmen able to create so many jobs for our millions of Filipino job seekers. So what to do? I mean, Singapore had this issue as well before. So Lee Kuan Yew, for example, he basically in his memoirs, I think it was the book From Third World to First. He basically said we had that problem before as well, where we wanted to essentially develop our economy ourselves, but the problem was we didn't have
enough. Yeah.
We didn't have enough businessmen.
Yes.
Right. And most of these businessmen were usually into setting up bazaars, malls, buy and sell.
Yeah.
None of them were interested in industrialization, setting up factories.
Local economy versus national type of, yes.
Exactly. But what we needed in order to create so many jobs was to have industrialization. How do we do this? Well, it turns out there was this low-hanging fruit, which is, let's bring in these foreign companies. They come in, they set up the companies, they set up the factories, they set up the offices, and they hire local people and train them. And in fact, when they pay wages, the wages even tend to be better than what the prevailing rate is by local companies. So a local company, a local Singapore company would pay this much. A foreign multinational, they would come in and they would pay a little higher or better. And the training methodologies, everything that they give, it's based on global standards. People learned all these international ways of thinking, of how to do business and all that stuff. They learned.
I think what I'm hearing is like, and to put it into analogy, I think a lot of people understand is, try doing this with your kids, right? You have 3 or 4 kids, right? Try doing the protectionism strategy with them and solving all the problems and insulating them with little, you're flicking all the levers to rig the game, in other words.
Yeah.
And then your kid has to go into the real world. It won't gel. Now you think you're helping your kid because you're protecting them, right?
You're sheltering them so much, right?
You're rigging the game for them. You're like, okay, it's a big bad world out there, so you're rigging it. Yeah, but at some point they're going to have to compete on that free market, and they won't. They can't. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Like the Philippines,
yes.
we're treating them like kids. The protectionism. Let's just give them the credit that it was born from a good idea and good intention. Filipino first, but we're cutting our nose to spite our face.
That's one thing I was going to say, actually,
Okay.
and you beat me to it.
All right.